Sure. So I am a physician by training. I graduated from Georgetown Medical School in 2016. I matched into neurosurgery at a program outside of Chicago and was training there for 2 years. And in that process, I met Dr. Panulo through some common contacts and had an opportunity to transfer over to Cornell to do an enfolded 2-year fellowship in entitled Radiosurgery and Innovation Fellow. And that was really the spark that started my journey that I'm on right now. So while I was on that fellowship, I decided that I wanted to apply to get an MBA, and I did. And I just finished my MBA at Stanford on Sunday. So I'm like a week post MBA here. And a little bit of what I was doing while I was Dr. Panulo's fellow is that, first of all, we were publishing broadly in radiosurgery, and that world was very new to me as well. So I was learning a lot there. And in that process, I came to understand that one of the hurdles in radiosurgical case planning is the fact that we have such a multidisciplinary team of people that sit around a table and plan these cases. You have radiation oncologists, neurosurgeons, neurologists, and then all the supporting staff. And so, not everyone's looking at the anatomy the same way. And so when I noticed this, I put together a team of bioengineers, other neurosurgeons from Italy and Cornell to build a venture called NeuroViz, which is essentially a platform that's used for radiosurgical case planning by deploying augmented and virtual reality. And so that was a really, really interesting iterative entrepreneurial process that got me interested in building a career at the intersection between technology, neuroscience, and business, and prompted my journey to come and get my MBA because I wanted to build the tool sets to be successful in that space. So this is how I got involved in my life outside of neurosurgery and kind of came over this path to the business strategy and bridging that over to the neuroscience side of things. So it was a super, super important experience for me. And we ended up building an MVP or a minimal viable product. And we were chosen so Cornell has a really rich incubator environment through the BioVenture eLab. I encourage you guys to look into it if you're involved with Cornell. And we got chosen to compete in this business challenge as one of 8, 9 teams. And we did very well in that challenge over the course of, I think, 12 weeks or so, and started raising money for our venture. And at that point, we had to make some decisions about do we want to do this now or later. And we filed for a full patent through Cornell because protecting your intellectual property in these kinds of activities is super important. And so that was kind of how the journey continued for me after my fellowship. Even as I was doing my MBA here, I was participating in the business challenge, pitching to investors. And in that process, I became really interested on the investing side of things. And when we decided to file the patent and wait for a while with the venture, I went on to do some venture capital work here in Silicon Valley, which is where I am now. And I worked with a team called GSR Ventures, which is a team of MD-MBAs that look at digital health tech deals. And it was a very great exposure to that world, to early stage health tech investing, which also includes neurotech, but also other kinds of technologies. Happy to talk about any of these things. I'm just kind of sharing a broad overview of the kinds of experiences that I've had over the last few years. And then I also spent some time during my MBA time here, working as an independent business development consultant for a company called Surgical Theater, which is a company in the AR/VR space. They provide various services and products for intraoperative and preoperative planning of surgeries in spine and cranial. So I helped them as an independent consultant to solve a particular challenge that they had of building a go-to-market strategy for a newly FDA-approved product that they had called Brainstorm, which is a platform that essentially helps plan epilepsy surgery, which is in some ways has some similar challenges to radiosurgery. So, one of the lessons for me is that the real joy in life is in the unexpected zigzags. I kind of happen to see that there's this issue that could be solved within radiosurgical planning. And then I happened to be able to put the team together to get something going. And in that way, it opens up new opportunities and new ways to use these skill sets that you gain over time. So if I can kind of give a overall theme that I noticed in my own life over the last few years is that, being nimble and open to opportunities and open to thinking about using your intellect and capacities that you've built within medicine as a medical student and that you will build as a resident in ways outside of it as well. So I think, don't limit yourself. If you see things that are interesting to work on, go work on them and see where it takes you. So I'll kind of stop at that, and happy to answer any questions about any aspect of the experiences that I just described to you, or anything else that you guys have in mind.
Awesome, thank you. And it really is such an incredible journey. And I appreciate that advice of, being nimble and willing to kind of follow those threads. So I think maybe getting to that, sort of branch point where, so you're, working on this venture, and I imagine it could go in a couple ways where maybe you decide that you're going to keep peripherally involved and go back to your clinical training, or go to, business school and earn the MBA, or maybe even consider getting a PhD or, a master's of science in the, technologies or the science behind it. So what was your thinking at that point of, why the MBA versus maybe those other options? And was there anything that like pushed you to that more?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think it's super insightful in that, yes, we have many options at any fork in the road that you meet, right? For me, the MBA was always on my mind because I was always interested in understanding the milieu in which we operate as surgeons and physicians. And for me, that meant understanding industry, understanding hospital workings and pricing models and go to market. And these are the things that really energized me. They felt very relevant to immediate action in life. And, as a surgeon, I'm always very action oriented in that way. And so that was my draw towards the MBA. Now, picking an MBA program is a completely different thing. I'm happy to talk about if anybody on here is interested in thinking about that path, because I think you have to be very deliberate and intentional about that and careful about what you're trying to get out of an MBA. Because I always say, you can't be a doctor without an MD. You can be a business person without an MBA. Sure. And so why are you getting it? And what are you hoping to get out of it? And intentionality is very important with the MBA. And for me, I was clear about that before I went in, and I was able to go in with the right mindset and then attack it the way that I wanted to. And now I'm very happy about it. But that doesn't always have to work out that way for that. In terms of the PhD, or what was the other option that you wanted to consider?
Or a master's of science, or more pursuing that scientific route.
Yeah.
In the technology.
Yeah, that can be very exciting for someone who's really excited about being a very technical person, who's excited about actually building out the software or whatever technologies you're looking at. So I think it kind of goes back to having some self-knowledge about yourself and understanding what makes you tick and where you can thrive. And hopefully the Venn diagram, the sweet spot is that overlap of those two things. And so I think a lot of us in medicine are very, especially as medical students, are very, very intellectual, very strong work ethic and things like this. So we can thrive anywhere we go. But the question is, do you have the self-knowledge to know what's going to be best for you? And so that's why these options become very important. It's not like you can't take the GMAT and go and get a PhD. It's not like you can't or get an MBA, or you can't take the whatever the other exam is and go get a PhD or a master's. So it's not about ability, it's about self-knowledge.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And just for the attendees, if anybody has a question, feel free to place them in the chat or the Q&A bar, and we'll certainly get to those. So again, thinking about now this transitioning from the more clinical side into business school, what were some challenges that you saw in doing that? Because I imagine the environments are at least somewhat different.
Oh yeah, they're very different. I came in, so my class at Stanford, first of all, I can't say enough nice things about Stanford Business School. I mean, it has been honestly the most phenomenal personal and educational experience that I've had of all the different trainings in it. And I loved medical school, and I loved my residency, and I loved my fellowship. So, this is really even beyond that, this has been just a completely wildly different experience for many reasons. Before I talk about all the good things, I'll answer your question about the challenges. I came in with absolutely no knowledge about the fundamentals of business, accounting, marketing, finance, and that's an outlier within my class, because most people come into business school, and Stanford is of the top 3 business schools, it is a much smaller class. So currently it's ranked number 1 in the world, and the class number is like 420 compared to Harvard, which is almost 1,000, and everybody else is kind of double our size. So it's a smaller class. But even given the smaller class, there are some typical paths that people take when they come into a business school, which is consulting, different kinds of investing, like investment banking to private equity or venture capital, or they come from product roles. They have some kind of management product experience within companies. So they have exposure to the inner work, the basic workings of the business world or understanding of business. Because if you're an investor, you're evaluating businesses. Sure. So even though you're not operating within them, you understand the financials, the go to markets and all these things. So I didn't have any of that. So coming in, it was the first quarter, we do all our cores, and that was really tough because I just had to kind of use different parts of my brain that I'd never used or even thought about, or looking at balance sheets, understanding financial models, understanding Excel in a deeper way than just, keeping my data for my studies and stuff. So,
right.
So that was a challenge. But beyond that, just having been a medical student, having taken all my steps and everything, I think all of us who go through this process have the capacity to meet that challenge, but it is a challenge. It's not going to be like, and it was a little bit frustrating because I was, I had so much more to learn than people that were maybe even a little bit younger than me or my age who had already done this stuff, So that initial hurdle is there. The other challenge was that we started off right pre-vaccine. And so, it was a little bit remote in the beginning. We were all on campus, so we still had out in our campus here is very, it looks like a national park. It's like all outdoors. So we had the ability to meet outdoors and things like this, but our classes were on Zoom and for the first quarter. And that was challenging, just sitting on Zoom for a long time, all day. But it was also probably the best way to do it, just to get all the cores in. So those were all the challenges coming in. The rewards and the joys were just meeting people from so many different backgrounds. In my class, we had 5 surgeon or surgical trainees like me who decided to come and get an MBA. And one is a general surgeon, 2 other neurosurgery people, and 1 OB-GYN and me. And so that was cool. So we had our little community there. But then I also, I ended up making friends that were from such different backgrounds than me, people from nonprofit, from private equity, from entrepreneurship. Like so many of my friends are now starting companies. So just this exposure to people with other walks to young, motivated people from other walks of life with whom you can have this network and this bond is invaluable. And so I think that's really what I take away from this is the relationships and the network that I built during my time here, and also just the core knowledge that I gained. So that's my spiel on the MBA. Happy to answer anything else.
Sure. Any questions from the audience? I don't want to hog the mic here. All right, well, I'm not seeing anything yet, but we'll definitely keep an eye on that. So being in business school, was there a particular class that is, challenging coming from the more medical side to adjust to, or, I guess just what does the pattern look like, or the curriculum in business school look like?
Yeah, I think this goes back to choosing the right school, right? It varies from school to school. I was considering, my choices were between Wharton. Ultimately, they came down to Wharton and Stanford, but I also had, a couple of other options that I was able to kind of eliminate through, Columbia, Cornell, and YU, so forth. For instance, Wharton has a program that has a healthcare track. So you focus on healthcare, different aspects of the business of healthcare, and you go through the track and you get a certain kind of education. Stanford is very much a generalist program in that you pick your adventure. And so that's not for everybody. But if it is for you, it can be a very, very awesome journey.
Sure.
So you need to be careful about what you pick. If you want something that's more, set in stone, you have to pick a program like Wharton or something like
Mhm.
that has a fixed curriculum with a major and, an advisor that takes you through those steps. Stanford, people come here to do really wildly different things than
Mhm.
most other MBA programs. So having insight into the program is super important because it allows you to because it's hard to answer the question because, there's so much variability between the
Sure.
top,
Sure.
5 to 7 programs in the country about how they deliver their curriculum and their
Sure.
experience. So I think it goes back to the notion that an MBA is something you get because you want. It's not something you need to be
Mhm.
an entrepreneur or a business person. But why do you want it and what are you looking for? So once you get all the pieces in place, like your recommendations and your high GMAT score and everything, then you can kind of go and shop around and see what
Sure.
makes most sense for you. For me, having a lot of autonomy and freedom and an ability to play in a very high functioning environment made the most sense for me. So I picked Stanford.
Mhm.
If I'd wanted something more fixed and, a clear, step, I just need to do these steps and I can get to the
Mhm.
spot kind of path, I would have picked something like Wharton. If you want to focus on, if you want to go into late stage investing or private equity in healthcare, then you have to pick certain programs that are strong at
Mhm.
that, like Columbia, Wharton. If you want to start your own company, you want to be in an environment where all the investors are, so you pick Stanford. So, I think you once you know you want to do this, you want to talk to a lot of people, a lot of alumni from these places, and understand. And they also have kind of these intro chats and stuff that you can go to and understand what's the right fit for you, because it's going to dictate that initial journey that you have.
Awesome. There is a question here in the chat from Emil. And it's a little bit more of a technical question on any tips on patenting devices. Maybe you can just share your experience going through that process.
Sure. So I'm assuming that everyone on the call is a medical student, right?
Mostly, yes, I believe so.
Or they're part of some university, is that right?
Right.
Right. So the patenting process, when you are an academic, either a student or a fellow or a resident associated with an institution, is really driven and owned by the institution that you're a part of. And that's something that's very important to know.
Mhm.
If you're innovating and doing discovery like things within your work at an institution, as a part of your contract with that institution, you've pretty much agreed to them at some point in some paperwork that your intellectual property is theirs because you're using their resources and their name and their network to be able to execute on what you're doing. And so the simplest answer to this question is there is often a technology licensing office associated with any institution. Cornell has a very robust one. All US institutions, as far as I know, have one.
Mhm.
And once you have an idea that is patentable, you have to engage with them and they take you through the process. And the process is
Mhm.
different from place to place because there's an internal process and then there's the process that you submit to the government to get the full patent. Patenting happens in 2 phases, as far as I know. One is the preliminary patent phase, which gives you a 6-month window to finalize the innovations on that particular patent. And then you apply for the full patent, which then takes a certain amount of time depending on what you're applying for. And at that point, you have the security on the patent. After 6 months, the preliminary patent expires, and it's then actually open to the public, and you may lose your intellectual property unless you go in for the full patent. So these are just some broad strokes about patenting. I'm not a patent expert, but I did engage with Cornell's licensing office during our patenting process. We went through a prelim patent, and then we converted to a full. And my venture involved 3 different institutions: Cornell's Medical Center, the Polytechnical of Milan and their bioengineering department, and Gemelli Hospital and Catholic University, which is part of Catholic University in Rome. So my team came from these three places. So we had the extra hurdle of coordinating a patent among international institutions. And so we engaged all 3 of these licensing offices from these places and had them talk to each other and guide us through the paperwork. So that's how patents are done for people in academic environments. Now, If you are not in an academic environment, then I would suggest that you seek out some more guidance on how this is done for an independent person out in the real world, doing a patent. I can't really speak to that, but I do have friends that are in that space. So I was able to talk to them to get some guidance, but it's a completely different process than if you go through the office at Cornell.
Awesome, good to know. Any other questions from the attendees? So I think we've seen, a lot of maybe more interest, or at least it's more publicized, of physicians and surgeons wanting to, earn MBAs or go into the entrepreneurial sphere. What do you think maybe in the environment of healthcare is kind of driving that?
That's a really great question. And I was actually reading about this recently, that apparently the data shows that there is an increase in people with MDs wanting to get MBAs. I think there are probably a couple of different drivers. Optimistically, I think it may be a increase in awareness that, our capacities as physicians that we build over time of, work ethic, drive, passion, domain expertise, motivation, technical capabilities, ability to relate to people, ability to lead people. These are all inherent to a work of a physician, are really broadly applicable outside of the hospital. So I think maybe, if I want to be an absolute optimist, I would say that really is the driver here of why people want to go get this other degree, to open up options for themselves, to see how they can apply these skill sets in places outside the hospital to move healthcare forward. If I want to be a pragmatist and look at practical reasons, there may be some practical reasons. One, I think there's a high rate of physician burnout, because you see physicians in all stages of their career getting MBAs. They're getting it at MD when they're still medical students. They're getting it as full-on chairmen and chairwomen of departments, and attendings and professors and people in between. And so I think part of it may be an anticipation of burnout and a reaction to burnout. Sure. That is maybe a little bit more of a practical answer. Another practical aspect of this is, earning potential. It goes up if you are playing your cards right, if you get an MBA and you have an MD. And I think that the other consideration is that, we live in an environment where, in the hospital as physicians, where we have insight into so many of the things that could be improved within healthcare and healthcare delivery and medicine at large. And one lever for actually being an agent of change and actually improving things is to have a skill set outside of medicine. And I think that could be a huge motivator for people to go get an MBA. And I think I probably fall into that bucket more than the others. And I think just, understanding your options outside of healthcare take some time being outside the hospital to do that. And one way to do that is to get an MBA. So these are the different ways. I mean, this is my kind of personal opinion about the different reasons for which physicians go and get MBAs. And I think it's a great thing. I've had a phenomenal experience doing it. And I expect that I can kind of build a career in different ways that I would not have maybe had access to had I not gotten this. So yeah, I'm a big proponent for it, but it has to be an individual decision.
Sure, absolutely. And you sort of touched on this, in mentioning that you can earn the MBA at really any stage of your training, or then, even afterwards, once you're on faculty or in attending. What do you think is, maybe the perk of doing that during training, whether a medical student or in the midst of residency, versus doing that as an attending? And then again, what are maybe some of the challenges of that?
Yeah, I think the thought process, once again, an MBA is a very intentional degree. And the thought process for why you're getting it is very, very important. And it's very tied to the stage at which you approach it. I had an inkling I wanted to get an MBA as a medical student, but I didn't do it at that time because I didn't know what I wanted to do with it. It was just going to be a degree that I get, and I knew I could get it at that time, but I didn't know what I would want to do with it. And so I stopped myself because I said, well, if you don't know what you want to do with it, then you just get it. then you're not really going to be able to maximize the potential of having that degree. And so I didn't get it as a medical student. My thought was I was going to get it during my 2 years of research in residency. Well, my 2 years of research in residency ended up being this really phenomenal experience as being a fellow at Cornell. And so I kind of didn't do it then. And it just so happened that experience is what really sparked my interest in now going and getting, because now I knew why I wanted it. I wanted it because I wanted to, build a career at that intersection between business, medicine, and technology. And my way of doing that was to get the skill set in place so I could then launch my technical and scientific knowledge over to business strategy. And so once I had clarity on that, once I had an entrepreneurial experience that I could leverage and dig deeper into to gain some knowledge about myself and what I wanted, it became very meaningful and very apparent why I wanted to get it, and I was able to go and get it. So that's my personal journey, right? Like, I was thinking about it from the medical student standpoint, research years, and then I actually ended up getting it afterwards. So that's one person. That's an N of one. That's one person's thought process. Now, if I can just kind of hypothesize why people would get at different stages, you have to also understand that an MBA getting an MBA as a attending is not the same thing as getting an MBA as a medical student or as a trainee, because there's a sweet spot for age, in my opinion, for when to get the MBA to be able to really maximize its utility. And there are different kinds of MBAs. There are executive MBAs, which are kind of accelerated programs that are tailored to getting you from where you are within your industry to a higher position within that industry. And that's typically what attendings and people that have professorships do. They go get an executive MBA, and you can get them at many of the top institutions. And Stanford does not have an executive MBA, which I found very unique, but Wharton does, Columbia does, so forth. And it's usually a 1-year program, or it's done part-time around your schedule, around your clinical and other schedule. And it basically, the purpose of that generally is not to pivot out of medicine into something else. It is to augment your journey within your current career trajectory to get you farther a little bit faster or give you some more optionality. So that's what that is, Now, a medical student getting an MBA is also not necessarily a full-time immersive experience sometimes, because you're still in medical school. So you have to kind of juggle those two worlds. Sure. And it is more of a typical MBA than the EMBA. And it basically gives you exposure to, what a full-time MBA is. You'll kind of see people from all walks of life around your age, and most of them will be pivoting out of, they'll be coming in saying, hey, I was in private equity, now I'm going to go into venture capital. I was in private equity, now I'm going to go into business strategy or whatever, or I'm going to go start my own business. So you'll see a lot of pivoters in that world, and it gives you a different exposure. But you may be frustrated because you don't really have, you probably don't want to pivot because you've already put in 3 years of medical school time. Sure. So you're thinking about boards, matching, and whatever. So there's the joy and benefits of seeing what the possibilities are, and the limitations and constraints of not necessarily wanting to jump into them right now. So then you're delaying your optionality later. So that can be the pluses and minuses of getting it as a medical student. Now, as a trainee, it's kind of similar to a medical student because you're in a slightly more mature phase in your life, and you can kind of really appreciate what a pivot is, and what, you can kind of open your mind and appreciate what other people's backgrounds have allowed them to do and what yours could allow you to do, and so forth. But it also presents a challenge to you, or, for instance, in my case, to see, what do I want to do with this now? Do I want to go back into clinical? Do I want to go start my own company? How do I want to focus my energy in the next step? And it presents some really tough options and challenges for you to choose from. I mean, it's a privilege, of course, and it's a joy to be able to have these choices, but it is tough. And it's much easier to just go down a fixed path. So depending on when you decide to get it, if you decide to get it, these are the kinds of things that I'm noticing that I have to think about, that other people have to think about at these different stages.
Sure. Thank you. So I don't want to, spend all the time thinking about, actually going to business school and, the process of that, but maybe you can tell us a little bit about the experience in investing, what drew you to that, and then just what that environment was like.
Sure. So I spent kind of a very focused time between the summer, between my first and second year, where we typically do these internships in business school, working with a venture capital firm. And I think, the first thing to understand, I don't know how much people know about, basic things about investing on this call, but I can just kind of give you a framework. The first thing to understand about investing is that it's done in different stages. There's investing that happens at a very early stage of a company, like an idea. And that's kind of like, angel investing or seed stage investing. It's a seed of an idea. And angel investing is usually done with people that are not really looking for returns on their investment, but kind of access to help mold the future of ideas and the future of a particular industry. So that's very, very early stage. And you can be an angel investor as an individual if you have money, right? If you have money to invest, you can be an angel investor. You can get plugged into the various networks and deploy your money out and invest. Then after that, there's venture capital investing. Venture capital investing is investing at an early stage, typically past this like seed stage idea phase to more, we call them series. There's a series A. Well, first there's something called a pre-seed and then a seed. Those are the first very early series or stages of investing. Then there's series A, B, C, D, and it just goes on. So venture capitalists play in that post-angel investing phase. And each venture capital firm has a different thesis for how they invest, what stage, how big the check size is, what industries they focus on. So that's the next step. So you go from angel to venture capital. And then the step after that is growth equity, which is investing in companies that have shown a product market fit, that are typically showing revenue, and you're putting your money in, betting on them that they will grow, and then giving them the support they need to grow. So these are kind of later stage startups to young companies. So that's the third kind of bucket of investing, growth equity. And then the but like the more mature bucket of investing is private equity, which is investing in companies that are mature companies, buying out companies that are, mature, and then combining them together, these kinds of things. So these are companies that have an idea, they have a product, they have product market fit, they have revenue, they have financial statements that you can look at. They have a lot more data that you can go off of when you make your decisions about investing. So this is the spectrum of where you can play as an investor. And outside of this spectrum in the private markets, there's public investing, right? You can be a public equities investor who looks at public companies and stocks and trades them and builds portfolios out of them. So that's different. I'm talking about the private side. So I spent time as a venture capitalist during my summer and my second years of the MBA. And in my role in the firm that I was working at, we were looking at health tech, digital health teams and ideas. We were typically looking at series A to C investments, sometimes seed, very rarely pre-seed. Our typical check sizes were between 500,000 to 5 to 7 million for the first round. And we were a team of MD-MBAs looking at health tech, digital health deals. And so during my time with them, I got to understand the different aspects of venture capital investing and what that role means. And it starts with sourcing a deal, finding companies that are interesting that could be potential and good investments, then doing diligence on those deals, i.e. digging deeper into the team, the idea, the market, and then understanding where, what the positives and negatives are with this particular option. And then making the deal, which is a transactional element to this investing. It involves, financial financial interactions, legal interaction. And then once you have made the deal, you now have this company as a part of your portfolio and managing that company as it goes through its growth and gets to the next stage of raising money, because these companies need to keep raising money until they can get to their exit point, right? Which is either going public or getting acquired or one of those options. And so I got to kind of have an exposure to all of those different aspects of that world. I sourced deals, I did diligence, I was involved in the deal making itself, and then I went to all the board meetings for our companies and understood the dynamics there. And so it was a super cool exposure. It helped me understand a lot about what's happening in digital health and health tech. And I think one of the really fun things about being an investor is you get to always be researching and thinking about what's out there and what's going on in the market, and what are the exciting ideas, and so on and so forth. And you get to have your own opinions, and then you get to put some money on it and make a bet and see. But then you also have to deal with the results of that if it's not good. So, that's the challenge, and that's the excitement of that stage of investing. Yeah, I hope that was helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, any questions from the audience, feel free to put them in the chat or the Q&A.
It's a very quiet audience. I think everyone's probably got their stuff on mute. They're like, when's the next guy coming on? I'm sure that's what's going on here. But Mike, it's a pleasure to talk to you. So I'm happy to answer questions.
Yeah, well, and this is fantastic. Just to get a really unique perspective on the whole trajectory. Because even the Neurosurgery podcast recently did the little business school series, and I think they talked to a lot of attendings who went into it as attendings and sort of that executive MBA route. So it's exciting hearing a younger perspective on that.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. I just hope it's useful. I mean, if all these people are on mute, I don't know what they're getting out of this, but I know you're getting something out of it. So
yeah,
and I guess it's getting recorded, right?
Yes, yeah. So we do. We share it in our video library for folks to follow up on.
Okay.
So
no, it's a pleasure because when I was going through the process myself, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I just want to say that
good.
When I was going through the process myself, it would have been really helpful to have seen someone who looked like me, who had the ambitions and ideas that I had, actually give me some advice or whatever. So it would have been helpful for me. So if I can have that effect on, a person at least, I'm happy to spend this time doing this.
Yeah, absolutely. For folks who are maybe earlier in their careers and are toying with the idea of business school, or maybe even at that point of thinking, do I want to pursue more of the science side, or of technology, or more of the business side of it? How could they go about maybe learning a little bit about the business side? If you have any podcast recommendations or books that folks could read, where they could sort of do their diligence and learning more.
Yeah. I am not a big podcast person yet.
Okay.
I think, someone says they're absorbing and writing down tips. Well, thanks. Good. Anyway, that was very nice of them to say. Anyway, I'm not a big podcast person, which is kind of embarrassing to say because I feel like everybody of my generation or our generation is, but whatever. I'm not that into it. I'm trying to get more into it. And I find it much more interesting to get out into the real world and actually interact and talk to people to learn about this rather than reading a book as well. I mean, I can give you suggestions for books, but my way of learning about this and understanding more about the business world was, I was living in New York at the time, and it's such a rich environment to get out there and like meet people and understand things. So if I don't know how it is post-COVID, but in the pre-COVID world, New York City has NYU and Columbia, two powerhouse business schools, Cornell Tech, who's like right in Roosevelt Island across our campus at the Med Center. And all of these places used to host informational events where they, aspirational MBA or PhD student, whatever, would come and like attend these events, and they would give you alumni stories and answer your questions and so forth. And I went to a lot of those when I was in the post GMAT pre-application phase to understand like how are people angling themselves, what are people thinking about. So that was my real life podcast, right? Like I go to this event at Columbia, I'll sit there and kind of, it's usually like an admissions event. Sometimes they're themed or whatever. And because it's New York City, all the other business schools also came through. Like Stanford had one, Wharton had one, and Wharton's such a short drive anyway, so you can just drive over and see that. Right. And so this was my way of really getting into the mindset when I applied, because you need to angle yourself in the right way for you when you apply. So that would be my suggestion. So don't really have a particular book that I want to put my name on or a podcast, but I think going to these kinds of events can be super helpful.
Yeah, well, and that's even more helpful to hear because I'm an MD PhD student, so I think like books, very very academic trajectory. So where business is probably more networking and talking to people. So it's good to
I mean, it's a very
even the
relational
approach to that is different.
Yeah, it's a very relational environment, which is what I love about it. Yeah, I think that was super cool because you could just get a lot of volume. Like people
Sure.
ask all these questions. Like one girl was asking about impact investing versus, something else that she was doing at the time, and I was just like, what is she talking about? Now, obviously, I know those things, but
Sure.
it was just like a whole new vocabulary going to those chats.